All right, welcome back, folks. Live at Drew's house, another edition. I'm Drew Moholland. This is Sarah Conway. This is our kitchen. Hope you're all doing well out there. It's been another week of, it's really been a couple weeks straight of protests after the George Floyd killing. And of course, COVID-19 is still out there. Not exactly lighthearted topics these days that we're dealing with, but hope you're all doing okay through it all. Let's get right to our guest here today, Tanisha Sullivan. She'll be on the line in a minute, but she's with the NAACP. So I thought she was a great guest to maybe ask some questions about this whole, not only the George Floyd killing, but also the protests. And obviously she's a very busy woman with the NAACP. So we appreciate her taking the time, appreciate it very, very much. So looking forward to that. But it really it's been fascinating to watch all these protests. It's like something I've never seen in my lifetime. I know, same for you, Sarah, I know, but it is certainly fascinating to watch. It feels like change out there.
Yeah, I think just trying to learn as much as we can and figure out how to make those changes come about. So
day by day, and day by day, it seems like there's something new too. So let's talk a little bit about that right now with Tanisha Sullivan of the NAACP. All right, we bring in Tanisha Sullivan now with the NAACP, the Boston branch. First time on the show. Tanisha, how are you?
Okay, thank you, Drew. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
And yes, Sarah as well. Thanks so much for making some time. You know, you must be as busy as it gets right now, I would think. We appreciate you taking a few minutes today.
Thank you.
It's been a crazy couple of weeks since the George Floyd killing, and obviously we've had protests pretty much in every major city, small cities as well, throughout the whole country. We were just saying in our little intro, I've never seen anything like it in my entire life. What has the last couple of weeks been like for you?
Yeah, I mean, same. It is, I think what we're seeing across the country is, for so many of us who've been in this fight, it's encouraging. You know, the murder of George Floyd was tragic. It was graphic. We've all seen it now. We've all borne witness to it now. The images of his death, I think for so many of us, will never leave us. And although we know that his is not the first killing of this kind, what is different is that so many of us have borne witness to it, and so many of us have been inspired through our outrage to take even greater action to bring about change. You know, and change not just in Minneapolis, but change across the country. So I'm very, very encouraged.
You know, I think that's been such a big part. I'm not the first one to say this. I've heard so many people say this, but it really is this idea. This has been happening for a long, long time, but now we're seeing the footage of it. These cell phone cameras with the cameras on the cell phones, I should say, are, you know, people are actually seeing this. And I think that is what's really leading to this. I mean, the outrage should have been there before, but it's to see this is just, I think it resonates so much more with other people.
Absolutely. I mean, we were, you know, we can't forget, we are still in the middle of a public health pandemic, in an economic crisis that has really caused the world to stand still in many respects, you know, over the past few months. And so as folks are home, many are home and working remotely, you know, really fixated on the news, trying to understand what's going on with the coronavirus and the economic crisis. This video, much like the video of Ahmaud Arbery's killing in Brunswick, Georgia, this killing of George Floyd really caught the attention of our nation, because so many of us were already, you know, tuning into media. And so with that, I think it's important to call out, as you did, Drew, this is not the first time we've had video, but it is the first time that we've had video from multiple angles. It's the first time, again, that so many have borne witness to it. But it has also led to the first time that we've seen the type of racial justice protesting in this country that we're seeing today. What we're seeing today has really never been seen before across this nation, in urban cores, in rural settings, in the suburbs. We're seeing people of all races, all generations taking to the street, lifting their voices in a cry out for justice. I read a story this morning about a woman, an 80-year-old white woman in Palm Beach, Florida, who ended up being the sole protester in her town. The town was preparing for, who knows, hundreds or thousands, and she was the only one who showed up. But she showed up with her Black Lives Matter sign, and we're seeing that again all over the country. And now that we're going into our second week of protesting, I suspect that we will continue to see people across this nation and now all over the world continue until we start to see some meaningful action and change. And so I do want to, for those of us here in Massachusetts, I do want to call out that that here, and I'm going to give you a couple of stats that I think are important for us to follow. According to the Mapping Police Violence Project, it's mappingpoliceviolence.org. Between 2013 and 2019, 56 people have been killed by police in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Wow.
So we are not immune to this either. This is not just about what's happening in other parts of the country. It's happening here. And so we really do need to see changes in our legislation, in our laws, to help prevent this from happening again, and to strengthen public safety.
Yeah, I think I'll let Sarah jump in 1 second, but I do wanted to mention one thing. Have you noticed, and it just feels like this to me, just being out in the world, people that even family members who, I know very well, who I know are good people, I find are asking more questions, questions that they've never asked before. It just seems like this lit that spark, of, what, I need to be asking more questions.
Absolutely. What we are seeing in this moment is that good people are coming to the realization that being good is not enough. We need people who are good and are willing to take action, because otherwise you're just a good bystander. And so what we're seeing, and again, what we're encouraged by, is that good people across the country, across the Commonwealth, are finally, realizing the role they must play to bring about the change we need to see. We need to see in our laws more community and resident participation in public safety. That can take the form of civilian review boards that would serve as independent bodies of residents who would review cases, incidents of this type of police violence. Community members would have the opportunity to review situations where mortal or deadly force has been used, to help ensure that protocols were followed. So we need to see more civilian review boards with subpoena power in our communities. We also here in the Commonwealth have an opportunity to, quite frankly, catch up with the rest of the country. Massachusetts is one of only 6 states in our country that doesn't have a certification or a decertification process for members of law enforcement. So what does that mean? I'm an attorney, and so I am a licensed member of the bar. I had to take a test, had to pass the test, had to get a license. And so there are certain rules that I must follow in order to keep that license. And if I violate the rules, then my license is in jeopardy. I could lose my license. We see that for hairstylists are licensed. We know that contractors who work on our homes, they're licensed, right? And if they do something wrong, they are in jeopardy of losing that license. Members of law enforcement in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts are not licensed. And so one of the things that we believe, and so many have been advocating for quite some time, is that members of law enforcement should be licensed, and they should be held to, the standards like many other professions are. And if there is wrongdoing, they should potentially lose their license. Derek Chauvin, who is one of the former police officers, I call them the Minneapolis Four, who were involved in George Floyd's killing. Derek Chauvin had upwards of 19 discipline misconduct violations on his record. Those who've reviewed his record say that upwards of 13 of those were serious misconduct violations. Yet and still, he was not only allowed to continue to stay on the Minneapolis police force, but get this, he was terminated in Minneapolis. If he had been terminated, if that incident happened here in Massachusetts, and let's say he was terminated from the Boston Police Department, he could have gone, in Massachusetts, he could have gone to Winchester or Newburyport and been hired as a member of law enforcement. So what we are really hoping will come out of this, what we're advocating around, is for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to adopt what they call a police officer standards and training, which would allow for a licensure process of law enforcement officers, and then what we call a decertification if there's some sort of significant misconduct that occurs. We need that in Massachusetts.
All right. Tanisha Sullivan, NAACP, joining us here. Sarah, that kind of feeds off, I know, a question that you wanted to ask about there. You want to jump in?
Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds like there are some very clear things that we can do to end the police brutality, but what are some things that like your everyday person can do to help those changes come about?
That is a fantastic question. I have been sharing with people for the past few weeks that there is something for each of us to do. And I think the protesting is important because the protesting helps to keep the attention and the spotlight on the issue. It's critically important that those protests are happening not just in the urban cores across the Commonwealth, but that they are happening in our cities, in our towns, and our hamlets all over the Commonwealth, so that more people can become aware of the issue, and so that, quite frankly, our legislators can take the action we need them to take. The other thing that's going to be critically important is there's going to be state legislation pending at our state house that will help to potentially address the violence we're seeing among some members of law enforcement. And we can talk a little bit about that in a moment too. We're going to need people to show up for the hearings. They will likely be virtual because of the world we're living in now. But guess what? That's an opportunity. That means that hundreds or thousands of us can now show up for these hearings. We're going to need people to show up for the hearings and to testify as to why these policing reforms are necessary for our public safety. So I would encourage people to keep an eye out for the hearings. And if you can, just dial in and just be present. There's also an opportunity to contact your legislators, even in this moment. We all have state representatives, we all have state senators, we all have city councilors or town selectmen or town select persons and mayors. Contact them now. And all you have to say is, we need policing reform. we need policing reform.
And let me ask you too, how much of the burden is on the police officers themselves? Because you mentioned the Minneapolis Four. I think what was so outrageous to so many people was, yes, there's this knee on George Floyd killing him, but then there's 3 other police officers just there letting it happen. I think that was part of the outrage in all this. How could they just stand there and let this man do that? I wonder how much is it? I think we can all acknowledge that policing is a very difficult job. And I haven't heard anybody argue that, people that, put their lives on the line every day. But how much is it on the other officers to say, when they see something wrong, they have to say something. They have to put a stop to these things.
Absolutely. Look, the work of law enforcement officers in cities and towns across the Commonwealth at the federal level is very difficult work. And as you said, Drew, every day, men and women have chosen to protect and serve our communities, and they put their lives on the line. And just like our members of the military, we are grateful for the work that they do every day on behalf of our communities. That being said, there are 2 points on that. One, we are over policed. We have the budgets for police departments and for law enforcement in this country are incredibly high. They're overwhelmingly high. And so what they do is they continue to perpetuate the growth, the expansion of policing of people versus really that protecting and serving of people. And so we really need to take a closer look at how much funding is going into police departments versus how much funding is going into, let's say, education and healthcare and housing that is so desperately needed. That being said, as you mentioned, we've got a bystander. There's a culture problem within law enforcement where being a bystander has for far too long been acceptable. Not only did we see it on full display in Minneapolis with the murder of George Floyd, but look, 2 days ago, we saw it on full display in Buffalo, New York. How many of us have now seen, oh my goodness, the vile video of an elderly man who was out protesting, who came face to face with law enforcement in riot gear, who pushed him out of the way, not only pushed him out of the way, but when he fell to the ground and blood started coming out of his head, we watched multiple officers look at him and keep walking. This is in the midst of protests that are shining a light on why not only police violence is a problem, but why bystanders among law enforcement are a problem. So we have a culture problem within our law enforcement. And the only way we're going to make sure that those officers who are truly there to do the good work of protecting and serving our communities are protected, and that our communities are protected from police violence is to bring about some of these policing reforms and to hold people accountable. There were over 1,000 police killings in the country last year alone. 99% of them, in 99% of the cases, officers were not charged. There was no accountability. So it's not just about having the laws on the books. It's about having the laws on the books plus us, all of us as a community, holding people accountable for bad behavior, so that those who are trying to do a good job have the ability to do so.
It's been interesting to watch on the, obviously the coverage has been, it's everywhere. I mean, it's every day in like I said, every major city. And something strikes me about in Buffalo, for instance, perfect example of kind of a wave, whatever you call those lines of policemen, arms, protected, shields, everything. And just kind of I keep using the word aggression. It feels like aggression, like it's more like an offensive movement, it's they're moving forward and anything in our way. I have had a lot of talks where I've mentioned where I feel like that is the thing that is just a big part of needs to be toned down. Like you're there to see something and react to, not necessarily be on the offensive in these, whether it be these protests or just on the streets of everyday life,
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, there is, I think there's something to be said for peacekeepers.
Yeah.
And we need more peacekeepers in our community who are certainly there to help keep the peace, maintain the peace, support peace in our communities. And what we are seeing, as you noted, is on the other extreme, we've got, more militarization of our police forces. And so there again, there is at the state level here in Massachusetts, there's legislation that is pending to really look at reducing the amount of military like equipment, military-like investment by our law enforcement departments. And look, there's certainly much debate that is happening in this moment around, people may hear about, there's a movement to quote unquote defund the police. There are some people, who believe that we shouldn't have any police forces at all. And then there are others who believe that there should be, that we do need law enforcement, but that we do need to reform law enforcement. And then, of course, there are some who believe that everything is just okay. Fortunately, in this moment, I think that group is a dwindling minority. So that being said, here in the Commonwealth, we do have legislation that is pending to look at reducing the amount of military weaponry that is used by our police forces. And here we go again, greater accountability so that when police departments want to buy this type of equipment, they need to talk with the community. They need to talk with their towns to say, look, we want to purchase this equipment and here's why we believe it's important. And they've got to get some approval in order to do so. So we really, so many of us have now seen what happened in Washington, D.C. last week, right in front of the White House, where literally we had peaceful protesters in the United States of America exercising their First Amendment right. And they were met with severe military force by the United States military at the bequest of the federal government. We cannot allow that to continue to happen. That really struck a blow, or attempted to really strike a blow at our democracy, our American values, everything that we stand for. So absolutely, we have a chance here in the Commonwealth to make sure that doesn't happen here as well.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah. Do you guys collaborate with, I know there are a lot of other big organizations really working for the same cause. Do you guys collaborate with them?
Absolutely. There's the NAACP is the oldest civil rights organization in the country committed to the elimination of racial discrimination and systemic racism. We were founded out of the anti-lynching movement. Really, the senseless, horrific killing of Black people due to racism in this country. That's what our organization was born out of. What we have learned in the 100+ years that we've been in existence is that there is absolutely no way to fight these battles and to dismantle racism alone. We need other individuals, we need other organizations to stand up with us. And so we work very closely, not just with other civil rights organizations, but we also work very closely with other civic organizations, because this is not, this is a problem whether we're talking about police violence or we're talking about educational equity, if we're talking about health equity, climate justice in our urban cores, all of these issues really do impact our social fabric, and that means it impacts all of us. And so individuals from all backgrounds, we welcome into this work, and truly, Sarah, we need in this work with us so that we can bring about the change we want to see. As an example, look, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the way laws get made, is through our state legislature. There are very few, there's only a handful of Black legislators in the Commonwealth. There are no Black executive elected officials, so governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, attorney general, treasurer, auditor, right? So there's no way that this can just be about Black people or other people of color fighting this fight. We need white people across the Commonwealth to stand, not just say, that they're with us, but we need them to stand with us, and we need for people to pick up their phones and call their legislators and let them know that you not only want to see change, you expect to see change.
Okay. And you talked about those hearings before. Is there, are there places or maybe accounts that we can follow on Instagram or Facebook or to make sure we're staying informed about when these things are happening? And
absolutely.
Guys, probably.
Yes, absolutely. So anytime there's a hearing at the state level, that'll be posted on the mass.gov website, so folks can check that out. In addition, for cities and towns, anytime there's a hearing, those will be posted on your public boards. In fact, that is the law. It is a requirement under open meeting laws in the Commonwealth for that to happen. In addition, the NAACP Boston branch, we will be sharing out hearings as they come up. The ACLU of Massachusetts, Lawyers for Civil Rights, the ADL of New England. I'm missing one in particular, but those organizations absolutely will, throughout the course of this process, continue to post when hearings are happening so that people can remain informed. And we'll be sure to share the information with you so that when some of these are moving, you have the information so you can share with your audience.
Again, Tanisha Sullivan here with the NAACP. So nice to take some time with us here out of her very busy schedule. If you have time for a couple more, Tanisha, I just want to
absolutely
on a personal level. I just wonder, when you see these protests on the street, and like I said, every state, every big city has pretty much seen them. What is the feeling that you get? Is it by nature, protests are supposed to be disruptive, right? That's kind of the point of a protest. So you see that. Is there a part of, is there any fear that comes with, some of these other scenes that we've seen as far as other groups coming in and causing disruption? Like when you see a big protest on the street, is it completely uplifting, or are there a lot of emotions going through? I'm just wondering.
Absolutely. I mean, the protesting, as you mentioned, is critically important. It is a cornerstone of our democracy. It's one of the things that make us the country we are, that really do. Protesting is an exercise of American values, and it's something that we should all encourage, embedded in, our First Amendment rights. And so seeing the protests is incredibly encouraging. And again, what's encouraging in this moment is that we're seeing diversity, racial, ethnic, gender, generational ability, diversity in these protests. It's important to note that we're seeing protests on the streets by the thousands, but we're also seeing There are people who are actively involved in a protest, who are not on the streets, who are in this very moment. They're drafting the legislation that needs to move forward. They're reviewing policy that needs to be revised. We're seeing corporations. Many corporations across the country have put out statements standing for Black lives, recognizing finally in this moment that when we say Black Lives Matter, it doesn't mean that all lives don't matter. It means that we're acknowledging that in this country for far too long, Black lives have not mattered, and that we want to be included when you say all lives matter. And so it has been incredibly encouraging for companies, for corporations to take part in the protest by taking a stand, lifting their voices and using their platforms to declare with us that enough is enough. And so, we're seeing companies now being more introspective about what's going on in their organizations as it relates to dismantling racism. So I am encouraged. That being said, it is ever important for us to remain vigilant because what we know is that there are forces out there are organizations, there are entities out there that are not seeking to bring us together in this moment, but they are certainly seeking to not only divide us, but to destroy us. And so as a country. And so it is critically important that we are vigilant when we're out there protesting for that type of those types of actors. It's critically important that that organizers of street level protests remind their protesters to be vigilant and to identify individuals who might not be there for good reason. And this is also, Drew, another reason why it's important to have more peacekeepers, community-based peacekeepers participating in these protests versus members of law enforcement and police departments. Community-based peacekeepers know their communities. You know who your neighbors are. And so as folks are out there protesting, community-based peacekeepers can help to ensure that there's not infiltration from outside forces there to cause harm to our communities.
It is fascinating. And thank you for answering it, because how that the All Lives Matter versus Black Lives Matter thing has just taken off on the internet, and just people, I think it's part of those questions more than anything and I think it's, and I've seen it answered, you answered it probably in the best way possible, but I mean, I've seen it on Twitter, Facebook, I've seen t-shirts, it's pretty fascinating how that point is now being made.
And it requires, so here's the thing, Drew. I think, for so long when people heard Black Lives Matter, it shook something in their core because, quite frankly, we really haven't had, an understanding. We haven't, and I'll speak about the Commonwealth here. Like in our schools, we're not taught, all of our history as a country, right? We're not taught. We don't spend time with our young people, teaching about our history with slavery in this country and what it has meant. The fact that the Emancipation Proclamation didn't magically one day, everybody's free and everybody's equal. And so what that has meant for so many of us is that we've been taught that this is a country of equality. Everybody's created equal. Everybody has the same rights. Look at the civil rights movement, all of that. And so when people heard Black Lives Matter, they were like, well, wait a minute. I thought we were all equal. Why are they now trying to single themselves out? And the reality is, as Black people, we've never, we've not tried to single ourselves out. This was never about that, but it was really about amplifying that the work of the civil rights movement is not over. It's only been about 52 years since the Civil Rights Act was signed into law, right? And so we're very fragile as a nation on these issues. And so us saying Black Lives Matter was, again, really about trying to get the rest of America, the rest of the Commonwealth to understand that we're still out here fighting. We're still out here fighting against racism. We're still out here, trying to make sure that schools with Black children in them have the funding they need so that Black children can truly, access a quality education so that Black children have as much of an opportunity to participate in America's prosperity as white children. And so again, I think in this moment, people are finally understanding, not just hearing the words Black Lives Matter, but understanding what we have meant when we say Black Lives Matter. So I am encouraged, truly encouraged by that in this moment.
So we're just going to make sure we're charged up there. This should be right back. But the one thing I did want to ask about too, we had the kind of talked about the old, I guess when I talk about this, I think my aunts, my uncles, we're in our young 30s, even my parents. So that next generation above us, I find that they're asking a lot more questions now. My aunt even said, that my cousin, who's, a little bit younger than me, but same generation, it's amazing how he enlightens me on a lot of this stuff. Like he answered a lot of these questions. And it struck me, I don't know if you saw this in Florida earlier this week or at the end of last week, 16-year-old American tennis phenom, Coco Gauff. Did you see her speech in Florida?
I did not. No.
She was great and called on, everybody. That was a lot of young people were there. It's, a 16-year-old tennis star. And she called on and said, this is your fight. And if you're into Black culture, if you have Black friends, this is your fight too. And it just struck me that this is a 16-year-old speaking so eloquently about all this and really rallying a whole different, what seems like age group. I mean, I can't, we're young 30s. I guess she feels a lot younger to me when you talk about a 16-year-old star. Just maybe those young people, this is going to really fall on a lot of them to also make change, and how important it is to have young people speak up.
Absolutely. Look, every significant, meaningful change in our country has been first led by a movement. So whether we're talking about the women's rights movement, the civil rights movement, the LGBTQ movement in this country, these movements have been led by young people. Yeah. It is critically important at this time that we allow young people to lead, that we allow young people to lead guided by our history. And that's why the intergenerational piece is so important, because these fights are not new. These are not new battles. We've got old battle scars to prove it. And there are lessons to be learned from what has been done very powerfully in the past that can help inform what is possible in this moment. The thing that is going to be and has already proven to be a game changer this time is technology, as you mentioned earlier, Drew. Not only do we all carry with us at any given point in time at least one computer by way of our telephone that allows us to video on the spot, but we're all also very, we're interconnected by way of the internet. And so literally within seconds, the world can be put on alert when something happens, or the world can be put on alert that we need more voices to help stand for justice. And our young people, look, have grown up with it. I'm a little older than you all, so I remember when the internet was created. And so that's truly a game changer. And so I am again at this time certainly encouraged by what I'm seeing, but it is critically important, and I believe President Obama talked about this earlier this week as well. It's critically important that, look, this doesn't just stay on the street and the protesting. That is important, and we need it to be sustained. But we also need to make sure that that laws are being changed, that policy is being changed, and also, I've kind of touched on it, but I want to make sure that I double down on this point. The fight we are in for justice in this moment is not just about George Floyd's murder and police brutality. It's much bigger than that. The fight we are in this moment is literally for the soul of our country. It literally is about our fight collectively against racism. Racism has, since the beginning of our country, been our most persistent and stagnant foe. We can take it all the way back, even here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The interaction among the Pilgrims and Native Americans, our indigenous people, racism was at the core of that relationship. And it has followed us through slavery, with the kidnapping of Africans, bringing them to this country and enslaving Africans who are now known as Black Americans in this country. Racism is what our fight is about. And racism shows up in every system of our country. It shows up in education. It shows up in housing. It shows up in climate justice, right? Why is it that in urban cores where there are large percentages of Black people and brown people, do we have the highest incidence, the highest rates of asthma, right? It's because of environmental conditions. Racism shows up in corporate America. Racism shows up everywhere we look in our country. So this fight is so much bigger than police brutality. And so it's important that as we're protesting, we're not just satisfied when the law gets passed and we have a civilian review board. It's so important that we stay in this fight for justice until we collectively dismantle racism, systemic racism, wherever it is found.
I talked about that spark that lit a fire earlier, and it seems like a few years back, the Colin Kaepernick situation did that same thing. I mean, it started it, but it seems, I mean, we've even seen the NFL almost apologize to Colin Kaepernick and how they felt like I saw Roger Goodell come out and essentially say, we missed the ball on this when Colin started doing that, and when he was essentially banned from, his career. I don't think he's played another NFL game. I wonder, as you think back about that, what do you think we do going forward here? How do we make sure this stays on the front page and change stays?
So Colin Kaepernick has been sacrificed his career for this fight. And we can't lose sight of that. And yes, Roger Goodell issued an apology over the weekend, a video apology over the weekend, and acknowledged that the NFL got it wrong. But that's not enough. That's good people doing good things. Yeah. But that's not good people really dismantling racism or bringing about justice, because today, Colin Kaepernick is still without a job. And more importantly, for him, it wasn't just a job, it was his passion. But in that, I am, and so many others are appreciative of his sacrifice. And it stands as an example. How do we make sure that this moment doesn't fizzle out? We've all got to make the decision that this is the fight that we're willing to sacrifice for. This is the fight that we're willing to lay it all on the line for, recognizing that, it's going to be a long journey, but we want this nation, we want our country, we want our Commonwealth, we want our cities and towns to truly, truly, truly live up to the promises of America. We want this country to be better for our children. We want this country to stand as an example across the world for what is possible. When the people stand up and say enough. And so the question for all of us is, what are we willing to sacrifice in this moment? Are we willing? Is this the issue? Is racism big enough of an issue for each of us? Is racism big enough of an issue for all of us that we are willing to lay it on the line to dismantle it? And each of us has a role to play in it. Each of us has a voice in it. Each of us has a responsibility to make sure that that we're not in this place again. And so I'm hopeful. And if folks want to learn more, if they want to get involved, certainly we as an organization, the NAACP Boston branch, our doors are open. We need more people to help us. We are an all-volunteer organization, Drew and Sarah. All of our members are volunteer. I'm a volunteer in this work. And so we need more people to help us keep this thing going.
Well, Tanisha Sullivan, NAACP, I probably kept you for about double the time I told you we would, just because you were just so fascinating and interesting, and taught us a lot too. So we thank you very much for that. Sorry for keeping you so long.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's a good conversation. We got to keep it going. I appreciate you all covering this. It's critically important. I think the media has an important role to play in this. About it. The longer media keeps this issue on the forefront, the more pressure it is going to put on power structures to actually do something. And so I greatly appreciate you all seeing this as using your platform. This is your contribution to the fight, and it is an important one. So thank you for using your platform in this way. I hope and pray that you continue to do so, because we need you. So thank you.
Tanisha Sullivan, all the best. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
All right, Tanisha Sullivan of the NAACP Boston branch. How about that?
Great.
All right. I don't think I really need to say much more after that. Have a great weekend, everybody. That's going to do it for another week of shows. Hopefully everybody's doing well through the COVID-19 pandemic as well. And if that has affected your family, we're still thinking about all those medical workers too, which is still a serious, real thing out there in the world as well. We've entered phase 2 here in Massachusetts in that regard. It's crazy how we've had almost 2 pandemics last year with the George Floyd killing and the protests and all that. But it's a crazy time, but certainly a lot of good going on as well. Thank you, Sarah. Excellent questions as always.
Thanks, Drew.
And the dogs must be sleeping. I don't know. Very quiet day from the dogs. Nice work from the boys there. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week. A big thanks again to Tanisha Sullivan of the NAACP. Just a very enlightening conversation, and she was great. We'll have her on again. Bye-bye, everyone.